Hello, America and the world. This is Radio Free Market, and I am your host, Michael McKay. We are behind the lines of socialism, my friends, and Radio Free Market is the voice of free people and free markets. Folks, this is an important show. We are going to have a wide-ranging conversation with Mr. Lew Rockwell, who is the founder and CEO of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and LewRockwell.com. Welcome, Lew.
Great to be with you, Michael.
Glad to have you with us. We also have our special commentator, Ms. Zoe Russell, who is a 2009 graduate of Mises University. Hello, Zoe.
Hi, Michael.
So, folks, let me further introduce you to Lew Rockwell. Lew is one of the key people in the world today promoting freedom and peace. Lew was a Ludwig von Mises' own editor in the 1960s and later served as Congressman Ron Paul's chief of staff. He's a founder of the Auburn, Alabama-based Mises Institute, as I mentioned a minute ago, and the highly successful blog LewRockwell.com. Together, these entities are among the highest frequented and most influential free market internet sites in the entire world. So the working title that I have for this show today is pretty broad. It's the disastrous cost of government-forced health plans on businesses, how to cure unemployment quickly, and how we can stop the spread of tyranny. And, you know, Lew, we just actually today and the other day saw Congress violating the Constitution and passing this disastrous health care plan. This is going to have very wide-ranging effects. Please explain why mandating and forcing businesses to offer health insurance to workers is a bad idea and makes no sense.
Michael, I'll just mention that we've had many decades of increasing government intervention into the medical care market. Really, every president since Roosevelt has made things worse, and that's the Republicans as well as the Democrats. But what Obama has done is, I guess, the biggest deal since what Lyndon Johnson did with the passage of Medicare and Medicaid. So it's a huge step up. It means, except for those who can find physicians who take no third-party payments, that is either government or private, and simply deal with you on a fee-for-service basis, as medicine was always true of medicine in the past, then we're all going to be forced into these HMO-style medical practices where I think of it as maybe 2 minutes with a doctor and he's going to give you 7 prescriptions because this bill is backed by the pharmaceutical industry massively, by the hospital industry, by the insurance industry. So it's going to be good for these industries that are connected to the government. They're big donors to Obama, so they're going to do fine. American business is not going to do fine, and neither are individuals. So I think if we look at things from, say, just an individual standpoint, we only have to think of what all government medicine is like. I mean, we can look at, say, the veterans hospitals, and if people have not been to a veterans hospital, I highly recommend it. First of all, the guys there can use your visit, but it's very interesting to see these Soviet-style entities in what we think of as a free country. And that's, of course, where they'd like us all, or the Indian Health Service hospitals. In Oklahoma is where I've been to see them, but they're in other states as well, the Public Health Service hospitals. All these socialist institutions of the federal government are pretty grim if you're a patient, and not too hot if you're a doctor either. But what Obama's going to do is, yes, he's going to mandate that everybody has to buy so-called insurance. And tell me keep me apprised of our deadline here. But I might just add to this: none of this is insurance. This all was a trick. Franklin Roosevelt picked it up from the Germans in the late 19th century. They started it. So calling Social Security insurance, then later calling Medicare and other medical programs, and now this thing, insurance is not insurance. Insurance is
something else, and we're going to have to pick that up right after the break because we're coming into the end of this particular segment. But please stay with us, folks. This is Radio Free Market. We have Lew Rockwell with us, and we're talking about the effects of this health care plan on Americans today. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and we're talking to Mr. Lou Rockwell. And we were just talking just before the break, Lou, you were talking about how this new passage is not health insurance. It's really not insurance at all.
No, and Medicare is not insurance. Social Security is not insurance. First of all, of course, they're mandatory. So if something's mandatory, it's not a market institution. But what happens with insurance is actuaries are able to look at a class. They're able to look at, say, a certain type of house in a certain city, and from experience, and these are tremendous analysts, they're able to tell that a certain percentage of those houses are going to burn down every year. Mm-hmm. And therefore they can sell insurance based on that knowledge. They can know that a certain percentage of otherwise healthy 60-year-old men are going to have a heart attack and die over the next year. So they can sell insurance and make a profit, but that's, you can't. It's not insurance if you have any control over it.
The basic concept of insurance is these things that are beyond your control.
Well, if you burn down your own house, that's a criminal act. So that's not, they can't insure against that. But medical care, you're in some sense in control of it. You can go to the emergency room as many times as you want if you're a welfare patient. You can, you're in control of your health to some extent. Ludwig von Mises, in his great book Socialism, written in 1922, talks about how socialized medicine diminishes what he calls the will to health, because just as the existence of unemployment insurance makes people just on the margin less concerned about keeping a job because they figure, well, I've got that payment coming for a year. Just as people are on the margin less concerned with saving for their retirement. This has, of course, had a horrific societal and economic effect, Social Security, because they figure they're going to get Social Security, the government's going to take care of them. Well, if there's socialized medicine, then people will take less good care of themselves because they figure, somebody else is going to pick up the tab. This is not good. It's not good for the individual, not good for society. It's not good for the economy. It's very, very bad. And so what Obama has done is taken a bad situation. We already have a probably half state, half private medical system, and he's going to drastically take it in the direction of greater statism. So this is very tough on business. He's nationalizing a big piece of the economy. He's putting on massive taxes. It's, of course, vast amount of spending. Vastly, you can't even believe that he's putting us even more into debt, but he is. So this thing is a total disaster. And what about the fact also, just from a sort of civil liberties standpoint, that as Ron Paul points out, in this bill is the hiring of 16,500 additional IRS agents. That's 16,500 additional tax police to enforce the health care plan. Now, I must say I don't exactly know what that means, but it doesn't sound good.
Well, absolutely. I mean, people think, as one congressman said in that particular report, that when most people think of health care reform, they think more of doctor's exams, not more IRS exams. But we're going to see a lot more IRS exams, particularly for small businesses.
Yes, and of course the government wants, we always have to remember, the government would like total control. Every government would like to be a totalitarian state if it could get away with it. So whenever, for example, after 9/11, when people's resistance to a police state diminished, the government vastly expanded in that direction. People are worried about health care matters, so they're expanding here too.
A lot of the people that are listening to our show are I would say, somewhat new to to a lot of the concepts that we present. And one of the great things that you've done in many of your writings that I advise the listeners to at LouRockwell.com, and go under his Lou's archives and pick out some of his essays. They're fantastic to read. One in particular that I really liked is just exactly what you were just talking about. Government creates human suffering, and in there you break down this how employers are directly affected and how they have to pass these costs that they incur on to their employees in the form of lower wages or lower employment and so on like that, because the costs cannot purely be absorbed by employers. They must be passed on.
Well, it's right, and although it's difficult to. I just want to mention it's difficult to pass some things on because, after all, in terms of say prices, every businessman is charging as much as he can, consistent with the highest profit, or at least that's what he's attempting to do. So, if the government puts huge more taxes on him, mandates that he offer these various government schemes, so-called health insurance to his employees, it's going to diminish his profit, and it's going to diminish the productivity of the business. He can't just pass it on.
Right.
So,
well, people forget that.
But you're exactly right. Employees earn less and have less secure jobs because of the mandates of the federal government.
And fewer people will be hired in the first place. So there's always this element of what we don't see, and because we don't see these people that would not be hired because the employer is not going to expand their business if they know that they're going to have to carry these additional costs. People forget this basic principle that employers are actually consumers of labor, and they have the same motivations as all consumers.
Well, they want the best product for the best price.
Sure.
When did
so that means
employers
that
start covering the health care altogether? Why did it even start with employers? Why wouldn't it just be the employees?
That is a great question, and it happened during World War II. And back in those days, the income tax brackets went up to 93%. And so if you had a very productive employee in your company and you wanted to compensate them to prevent them from going someplace else, it didn't make sense to pay them above a certain amount. And by the way, that 93% came in at a relatively low level. So what companies came up with was ways to give their employees non-tax compensation. So this is when the whole idea of company-supplied health insurance, so-called, began, and it made no sense whatsoever, except with these 93% tax rates.
And it stuck.
I'm sorry, Zoe. What did you say?
It just stuck.
Yeah, and it just stuck, exactly. Well, eventually the IRS started claiming, hey, this is actually income. And so then the whole process began of employers getting this as a tax deduction, and everyone started taking it for granted that this was going to come, that was part of the employment package.
As an individual, you used to be able to deduct on your income tax your health insurance premiums, but Reagan ended that. The alleged free market guy, Ronald Reagan.
Right, exactly. So, it's very obvious that the actions that were taken in the last few days are really going to make this recession worse. Please, if you would, explain why the price of labor must fall.
Well, because the government is mandating all these additional costs, so it's and they're talking about raising the minimum wage, which is disastrous. All the high payroll taxes, all the lawsuits that if an employer decides to fire an employee, it's not sometimes easy. That's becoming more and more difficult. That's actually the sort of a union and government goal, is to make it almost impossible to fire anybody, which of course has a very bad effect. But if we look at something like the Social Security tax, anything that is mandated, the total amount the employer pays for you is your that's what you should be getting as salary. But a lot of it is going to Social Security. It's going to payroll taxes. It's going to all kinds of state unemployment taxes and injury taxes and so forth. So yeah, we all make much less money than we would in the absence of all these controls by the government.
Well, Austrian economics does not rely on empirical studies, but from logic for its strength. But as you pointed out in your recent article, Richard Vedder and Lowell Galloway spent years accumulating evidence of the link between full employment and lower labor costs on the one hand, and higher labor costs and unemployment on the other. What did they find out?
Well, they looked at the Great Depression specifically to see why did unemployment go to 25%. And by the way, because Clinton and others have finagled with the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics determines that figure, probably our actual unemployment right now, as compared to the 25% during the Great Depression, is in the upper teens. It's not 10% or 9.8%. But what they discovered is that the government deliberately sought to raise wages during as a crazy Hoover-Roosevelt policy on the idea that the government could just sort of order you to be paid more. But what that meant was, just like the minimum wage, it outlawed employment, except under certain conditions. And because they were able to keep the wages up and minimum wage laws and that sort of thing, we had just, again, as you mentioned before, horrific human suffering. So there's a lot of suffering right now, and the government is really engineering a whole lot more suffering. We're in this recession. Maybe it's a depression. They keep talking about a recovery, but I must say I don't see it. I mean, they may be doing fine on Wall Street, but that's all.
There's certain sectors. Now, we're not going to have time to really develop this question, so we're going to get it started before we have to take another break. But this is so obvious. Why is this so mystifying to Congress and the Obama administration as they keep trying to pretend that reality doesn't exist?
Well, that's exactly right. They do try to pretend that reality doesn't exist. But, they're actually, I would argue, maybe not well-intended. The things they're doing are very much in the interest of themselves as the government, makes them more powerful, gives them more to control, and also more money to reward the special interests that put them in power and keep them in power. So things that, it doesn't make sense for the country as a whole, but they don't care. It's good for them and for their friends.
Passing it forward. All right, folks. Well, we're going to have to take another break. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm Michael McKay, and I'm talking with Mr. Lou Rockwell, and we're going to come back in just a minute, so please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and I am your host, Michael McKay, and with me is our very special guest, Mr. Lou Rockwell, and our special commentator, Ms. Zoe Russell. So, Lou, I'm homeschooling my 15-year-old daughter, and we have been introduced. It's been a wonderful experience, and we've been introducing her to many of the concepts of Austrian economics. And one of the first lessons that we covered some years ago when we started this was somebody always pays, or as the acronym stands, TANSTOFL, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. What is the social cost of overpricing labor relative to what the market would bear?
Well, Michael, I might just say that's, of course, such a great point to be making to your daughter, because if you were to listen to the media right now and only learn from the media and learn from what the Obama administration is saying, you'd think that the government has like a huge pot of dough that they can hand out. Nobody has to pay for it. It's just sort of there, and it's just a matter of who gets it.
The magic money
They never
tree.
point out that the government has no money of its own. It can either take it by force, i.e. tax us, it can borrow it, which has other bad effects, or it can print it, which the Federal Reserve does.
Or they can steal it from other via conquering other nations.
Well, they can loot. You're exactly right. They can loot other nations as well as us. So that's the nature of government. It's somebody indeed does have to pay, but if any of us have ever been unemployed or know people who've been unemployed, it can be life destroying. I mean, it can be family destroying. It's people can lose everything, lose a lifetime of the results of a lifetime of hard work. So it's just horrific. I mean, these are not just statistics. These are real human beings who are being stepped on by the government, and the reason is we could actually go from whatever is the actual unemployment rate today, 17, 18, 19%, to 0%, like overnight. Now, it wouldn't quite be overnight, but almost overnight. We could actually get rid of all unemployment if the government would get out of the labor market. So it's all.
This is one of your great essays. I'm going to interrupt you here because I want everyone to please write this down. Lou has written this wonderful essay. It's How to Fix the Jobs Problem. And this is one of the key things that you make, this point that you make, that all this talk of unemployment is preposterous. And, please expand on that.
And by the way, there was no unemployment in human civilization before unions and welfare states started. There was no such thing as unemployment in earlier centuries because there wasn't artificial impositions against being able to work and earn a living. So, but today the government's got so many different things it does to create unemployment. I mean, whether it's the minimum wage, which, as Thomas Sowell always points out, cuts off the bottom part of the ladder for people young people and so forth, who need a start. All the high payroll taxes that just the amount of resources any employer has to expend keeping track of all this stuff. It's a huge cost. All the laws that threaten you if you fire an employee because you don't think the employee should be able to leave when they want to leave, absent a contract, and you should be able to fire them if you don't feel they're doing the job. But there are all kinds of laws that make that very scary and difficult for the employer. And then there's all the just all the other considerations that an employer has to take into account besides, can this person do the job? Is this the best person I can get for the job? You have to consider all kinds of demographic and other questions the government wants you to consider that have nothing to do with whether this person can do the job. And then there's the unemployment subsidy, which creates higher unemployment. I remember when George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, was complaining about in his recession about unemployment, and he dramatically lengthened and increased the amount of unemployment payments, and then we're shocked to see unemployment went up. Well, it's a basic principle. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. So unemployment insurance subsidizes non-work, and therefore we get more non-work and less employment. It's very difficult to start a new business because of all the various taxes and mandates.
Right.
There's all the withholding taxes that can harm both employers and employees. And if you're an independent contractor, they take up more than half your income, or at least close to half your income, which strikes me as immoral. I mean, that's, even if one thought that taxes were legitimate, taking half of somebody's income for the people in Washington continue to live in the style to which they've become accustomed. It seems to me a significant problem. And then all the labor union laws that enable labor unions to force their will onto employers and employees. Maybe Obama's going to make this one worse with the so-called card check law and make it easier for unions which enforce their will by violence. I mean, they think nothing of beating up so-called scabs, that is, people who, when they leave their jobs, would like to have those jobs, need those jobs, but they feel free to be able to beat them up and do worse things to them. And the cops never interfere because the unions always have a sort of blessing from the government. So to harm people for its own benefit, for the benefit of special interests like labor unions, and crushing the faces of poor people into the dirt with their boot. I mean, that's what they're doing, and it's a disgusting and rotten thing.
Yes. Well, this article that I just referenced, How to Fix the Jobs Problem, that you wrote, you not only list the various barriers and give an excellent explanation of each and every one of them, but you also then bridge to the next topic, which is, why the other objection that happens to this is that it's not just jobs that people want, but they want good-paying jobs, and they're not all, often willing to take the labor that is available to them. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to interrupt myself and not let you answer that question because we have to take another break, but we will be back right in a couple of minutes, folks. So this is Radio Free Market, and please stay with us. We'll be right back.